Today we're diving deep into the most sinister Freemason rituals of the 18th century, the forbidden and terrifying ceremonies that mainstream history desperately wants to keep buried. These aren't the sanitized lodge meetings your grandfather might have attended, but genuine occult practices that involved human sacrifice, demonic summoning, and blood oaths that bound men's souls to infernal powers. Before we begin this dark journey into the shadows of history, let me know in the comments where in the world are you watching from. I love connecting with fellow truth seekers across the globe who aren't afraid to confront the darker truths of our past. While Freemasonry has gained renewed attention through movies like National Treasure and countless conspiracy documentaries on Netflix and YouTube, the real truth behind their 18th century practices is far more disturbing than Hollywood dares to portray. These entertainment pieces only scratch the surface, showing you the symbols and the handshakes, but they never reveal what actually happened in those underground chambers when the candles were lit and the real ceremonies began. Known as the world's oldest and most powerful secret society, Freemasonry's 33rd degree initiations involved rituals that would make medieval torture chambers seem like children's games. We're talking about ceremonies where grown men willingly allowed themselves to be buried alive for 3 days, where they drank human blood from consecrated chalices, and where they swore oaths so binding that breaking them meant not just death, but eternal torment. These weren't symbolic ceremonies with fake swords and costume jewelry. They were genuine occult practices with real demonic connections that granted members supernatural abilities to control governments, manipulate economies, and bend reality itself to their will. The evidence is buried in church records, hidden in private family archives, and scattered across forgotten manuscripts that the modern Masonic order has spent millions trying to destroy. What horrors awaited those seeking the highest degrees of this ancient brotherhood? What Luciferian worship ceremonies took place behind closed lodge doors in the basements of churches and the cellars of manor houses? And what blood oaths bound these men to forces beyond human understanding? Join us as we uncover all the mysteries and sinister secrets of Freemasonry's darkest chapter, a story so disturbing that even today, 3 centuries later, there are powerful people who will do anything to keep these truths buried. To understand the true horror of these rituals, we must first examine how Freemasonry transformed during the 18th century from a simple guild of stoneworkers into something far more dangerous and supernatural. And if you're ready to discover truths they don't want you to know, hit that subscribe button now, because this journey is going to take us into some very dark territory that most channels won't dare to explore. The story begins in 1717, when 4 London lodges came together to form the first Grand Lodge. But what history books don't tell you is that this wasn't an innocent social club forming. It was a carefully planned takeover of an ancient organization by occultists who needed a legitimate front for their activities. According to forbidden manuscripts like The Secret Rituals of the OTO and leaked documents from the Grand Lodge archives that were smuggled out by conscience-stricken members in the 1800s, 18th century Freemasonry underwent a dark evolution from its medieval stonemason origins. The traditional 3 degrees, entered apprentice, fellow craft, and master mason, became mere stepping stones to the true power structure, the 33 degrees of Scottish Rite Freemasonry, each more sinister and demanding than the last. What most people don't realize is that the Scottish Rite wasn't actually created in Scotland at all. It was developed in France around 1754 by a secretive group of occultists led by a man known only as the Unknown Superior, who wanted to use existing Masonic lodges as cover for their real agenda, establishing direct communication with infernal entities and using their power to reshape European society. The transformation began when influential members like the mysterious Comte de Saint-Germain infiltrated lodges across Europe. Saint-Germain was no ordinary nobleman. Witnesses described him as a man who never aged, who spoke dozens of ancient languages, and who possessed knowledge of alchemical secrets that allowed him to create gold and precious gems from base materials. He brought with him ancient texts stolen from the destroyed Knights Templar libraries, including the infamous Red Book of Appin, which contained detailed instructions for summoning and binding demons to human will. These weren't theoretical exercises. Lodge records from Paris describe ceremonies where Saint-Germain actually performed these summonings, with terrified witnesses reporting the appearance of shadowy entities that spoke in voices like grinding stone and promised earthly power in exchange for human souls. By 1750, over 10,000 lodges operated across Europe and America, but the real power lay with the highest degree members, fewer than 100 men who controlled vast networks of political and financial influence through their demonic pacts. These weren't just wealthy businessmen playing dress-up in fancy aprons. Records from the French National Archives, discovered during renovations in 1987 but quickly sealed again, reveal that King Louis XV's most trusted advisors were all 33rd-degree Masons who used their supernatural abilities to manipulate court decisions and military strategies. They could predict enemy movements through scrying rituals, influence the king's dreams to plant ideas, and even cause the mysterious deaths of political opponents through curse rituals that left no physical evidence. The corruption spread like a plague across the Atlantic. The American founding fathers weren't immune to this influence. Benjamin Franklin was documented as attending special ceremonies in underground Paris lodges where witnesses reported seeing shadowy figures that weren't quite human moving around the ritual circles. Franklin's own diary, kept locked in the Library of Congress restricted archives, contains entries describing conversations with the old ones and bargains struck for the future of the new nation. George Washington himself expressed private concerns about the dark influences within American lodges, writing in a letter to a trusted friend that some lodge brothers seemed to possess knowledge that no mortal man should have. The lodges became recruitment centers for a shadow government that operated through occult means rather than traditional political channels. Each new initiate was carefully selected based on their psychological profile, men who were ambitious but morally flexible, who craved power more than they feared consequences, and who possessed the mental strength to withstand what the rituals would do to their souls. The initiation process was designed to gradually break down a person's natural moral barriers through a series of increasingly horrific ceremonies. New members started with simple oath-taking and symbolic play-acting, but as they progressed through the degrees, they were required to participate in actual criminal activities, witness torture and murder, and eventually commit acts so terrible that retreat became psychologically impossible. By the time a man reached the 30th degree, he was so compromised and so dependent on the Brotherhood for protection that he would do literally anything to advance to the final 3 degrees where the real power lay. The financial records of major European banks from this period show inexplicable patterns that only make sense when you understand the supernatural element. Successful lodge members consistently made impossible investment decisions that paid off, knew about political changes weeks before they happened, and accumulated wealth at rates that defied economic logic. They weren't just lucky, they were receiving information from sources that existed outside normal time and space, entities that could see future events and manipulate probability itself. The price for this supernatural advantage was steep. Each favor from their demonic patrons required payment in the form of human suffering, whether through wars they helped start, plagues they helped spread, or individual sacrifices they performed in their underground temples. The 33rd degree initiation chambers were far removed from the ordinary lodge rooms that tourists might visit today during public tours. These sacred spaces were hidden beneath major cities in networks of tunnels that connected to ancient Roman catacombs, abandoned plague pits, and forgotten medieval dungeons. In Paris, the main ritual chamber lay directly beneath Notre Dame Cathedral, accessed through a secret passage behind the altar that required 3 different keys held by 3 different lodge officers. The London Chamber was built into the foundation of the old London Bridge, using stones from executed criminals' prison cells, while the American chambers were constructed beneath Trinity Church in New York and Independence Hall in Philadelphia, their locations chosen specifically because they sat on ancient Native American burial grounds where the spiritual veil was already thin. These underground sanctuaries defied every principle of 18th century architecture and engineering. The main ritual hall in Paris measured exactly 33 feet in each direction, with a domed ceiling that rose 66 feet above the black marble floor, dimensions that weren't chosen for practical reasons but for their occult significance. The floor itself was a masterpiece of dark artistry, featuring an inverted pentagram carved from a single piece of obsidian that had been transported from volcanic caves in Italy where medieval witches once performed their sabbats. Around the pentagram's perimeter, smaller circles contained sigils and symbols that hurt to look at directly. Witnesses described feeling physically ill when they tried to focus on these markings, as if their minds were rejecting information that human consciousness wasn't meant to process. The walls of these chambers told their own horrifying story. Instead of normal stone or brick, they were lined with human skulls arranged in precise geometric patterns that created optical illusions when viewed by candlelight. These weren't anonymous remains from old cemeteries. Each skull belonged to a specific person whose identity was recorded in leather-bound books that detailed how they died and why their remains were chosen for this purpose. Many belonged to executed criminals, but others came from lodge members who had tried to leave the organization or reveal its secrets. Their skulls served as both decoration and warning, reminding new initiates of the consequences of betrayal, while their hollow eye sockets seemed to track movement around the room with an intelligence that defied death. The ritual furniture was equally disturbing and purpose-built for ceremonies that mainstream historians refuse to acknowledge. The central altar was carved from a single block of black granite quarried from an abandoned Scottish castle where dozens of people had been tortured and killed during clan wars. Its surface was permanently stained with centuries of blood sacrifice, the iron content having bonded with the stone to create patterns that looked almost like faces screaming in eternal agony. Arranged around this altar were 13 chairs made from the bones of different animals: wolf, bear, eagle, serpent, and others, each representing a different demonic principality that the lodge had formed alliances with over the decades. Candidates entered these chambers through ceremonies that were designed to break their psychological connection to the normal world above. They were required to lie in actual coffins for periods of up to 72 hours, experiencing a symbolic death that many described as feeling disturbingly real. During this time, they reported having vivid dreams or visions of conversation with deceased lodge members who shared secrets about the organization's true purposes and warned about the costs of advancement. Some candidates emerged from these coffins speaking in languages they had never learned or possessing knowledge of events that hadn't happened yet. Clear signs that they had made contact with entities that existed outside normal time and space. The chambers themselves seemed to exist partially outside normal physical laws. Multiple witnesses reported temperature drops of 20 to 30 degrees the moment they crossed the threshold. Even during summer months when the outside air was warm, candles burned with flames that cast shadows in directions that made no geometric sense, and sounds echoed in patterns that suggested the rooms were much larger than their physical dimensions. Most disturbing of all were the whispers, voices speaking in ancient languages like Latin, Greek, and tongues that predated human civilization, offering knowledge and power to those brave or foolish enough to listen. Lodge brothers were required to remain blindfolded until the moment of their final revelation, when silk scarves were dramatically removed to reveal the full horror and majesty of their new spiritual home. Many candidates fainted at this moment, overwhelmed by the visual assault of symbols, skulls, and shadows that seemed to move independently of their light sources. Those who remained conscious often described feeling as if they were standing at the edge of a vast abyss, looking down into depths that contained both infinite knowledge and absolute terror. The 33rd degree didn't just confer honorary titles or social status, it granted genuine supernatural capabilities that members used to dominate earthly affairs in ways that seemed impossible to outside observers. These weren't parlor tricks or clever illusions, but demonstrable abilities that left physical evidence and changed the course of history. French police records from the 1760s contain dozens of witness statements describing lodge members performing feats that violated natural law, while church archives document exorcism attempts on prominent Masons who displayed signs of demonic possession during their daily lives. The first and most commonly reported ability was psychic domination, the power to influence minds through concentrated will and ritualistic preparation. This wasn't simple persuasion or charisma, but actual mental control that allowed high-degree Masons to make people act against their own interests and moral principles. Benjamin Franklin demonstrated this ability during diplomatic negotiations in France, where opposing negotiators would suddenly change their positions mid-sentence, often agreeing to terms that heavily favored American interests while looking confused about their own decisions. The technique required specific preparation rituals involving meditation with consecrated mirrors and the burning of incense made from herbs that had been blessed during demon summoning ceremonies. Successful psychic domination left the target with no memory of being influenced, but witnesses reported that the Masons' eyes would turn completely black during the process, and the air around them would shimmer like heat waves even in cold rooms. Material manifestation was perhaps the most dramatic of their abilities. The power to summon wealth and opportunities through demonic contracts that always demanded eventual payment in forms the contractors rarely anticipated. Lodge records from Amsterdam banks show members making investments that defied all logic but consistently produced massive returns, as if they knew exactly which ships would arrive safely and which would be lost at sea. The Rothschild family's rise to power during this period wasn't due to superior business acumen alone. Family letters discovered in Swiss bank vaults describe rituals performed before major financial decisions, including ceremonies where family members would consult with the Old Ones, who provided specific instructions about market movements and political changes. The manifestation process required offering something of personal value to demonic entities, not money or possessions, but memories, emotions, or years of natural lifespan. Many successful lodge members aged rapidly after major financial coups, their hair turning white overnight, or their faces developing deep lines that made them look decades older than their chronological age. Prophetic vision through scrying rituals gave lodge members advanced knowledge of future events that they used to position themselves advantageously in politics and warfare. These weren't vague predictions or educated guesses, but specific details about dates, names, and outcomes that proved accurate down to the smallest details. The technique involved gazing into pools of consecrated blood, usually animal blood mixed with specific human additions, while in a trance state induced by inhaling vapors from burning manuscripts written in ancient languages. During these sessions, members would see images of future events playing out like scenes in a theater, complete with conversations they could later verify word for word when the predicted events actually occurred. George Washington's Continental Army won several crucial battles because Masonic officers had advanced knowledge of British troop movements and battle plans, information that couldn't have been obtained through normal intelligence gathering since the decisions hadn't been made yet when the visions occurred. Astral projection allowed high-degree members to travel consciously to infernal realms for direct consultation with dark principalities who had been influencing human affairs for millennia. This wasn't meditation or dreaming, but actual separation of consciousness from physical body, leaving behind a vessel that appeared dead to outside observers while the Mason's spirit traveled to dimensions where normal human souls couldn't survive. These journeys required elaborate protective rituals and usually took place in specially prepared chambers lined with salt circles and protected by bound lesser demons who served as guards. During astral travel, members could access the great libraries of hell where the true history of human civilization was recorded, learning about events that had been erased from earthly records and discovering the real reasons behind wars, plagues, and political changes. They returned with knowledge that made them incredibly valuable to rulers and generals, but also with permanent changes to their personalities. Family members often reported that loved ones seemed like different people after achieving high degrees, colder and more calculating, as if something essential to their humanity had been left behind in those infernal realms. Life extension through ritualistic transfer of life force was perhaps the most horrifying ability, allowing members to prolong their physical existence by stealing years from willing or unwilling donors. This practice required elaborate ceremonies involving multiple participants and resulted in the donor aging rapidly while the recipient grew younger and more vital. The process wasn't permanent. It required renewal through increasingly demanding blood oaths and personal sacrifices that escalated with each degree attained. Some members became addicted to this unnatural longevity, requiring weekly or even daily transfers from a stable of human cattle who were kept in hidden facilities beneath major cities. Police records from Paris describe the discovery of underground chambers containing dozens of prematurely aged individuals who appeared to be in their 80s, but carried identity papers showing them to be in their 20s and 30s. Each 33rd degree Mason was assigned a personal demon familiar during their final initiation. Entities with names like Belphegor, Astaroth, or Malthus, who provided ongoing guidance in exchange for specific services to their infernal hierarchy. These weren't imaginary friends or psychological constructs, but actual beings that other people could sometimes see and hear, especially during lodge meetings when the spiritual barriers were deliberately weakened. The familiars appeared as shadows that moved independently, voices that spoke when no one was present, or animals that displayed impossible intelligence and seemed to understand human speech perfectly. They provided their human partners with supernatural abilities but demanded increasingly horrible payments, starting with small acts of cruelty and progressing to major crimes that bound the Mason ever more tightly to his demonic patron. These rituals represented far more than historical curiosity or elaborate theater. They symbolized humanity's ultimate rebellion against the natural order and divine authority that governs creation. Every element of the ceremonies was carefully designed to reverse sacred principles and mock traditional religious practices, creating a systematic inversion of spiritual law that opened doorways to realms that were meant to remain sealed. The progressive nature of the degrees created a psychological trap where each step seemed reasonable compared to what had come before, gradually normalizing behaviors and beliefs that would have horrified the initiate in his former life. This process mirrors the classical temptation narrative found in cultures worldwide, where supernatural entities offer immediate gratification and earthly power in exchange for spiritual corruption that reveals its true cost only after the bargain becomes irreversible. Like Faust's bargain with Mephistopheles in Goethe's masterwork, Masonic initiates traded their souls for knowledge and influence, believing they could outsmart entities with millennia of experience in human manipulation and spiritual warfare. The tragic irony of these arrangements was that the humans always believed they were the clever ones, using demonic power for their own purposes while remaining in control of their destinies. Historical records show that virtually every high-degree Mason eventually discovered the true nature of their bargain. They hadn't acquired supernatural servants, but had become servants themselves, bound to carry out agenda that often directly contradicted their original intentions and moral principles. The demons weren't interested in corrupting individual souls for sport, but in using human agents to reshape civilization according to infernal principles that would ultimately result in mass spiritual destruction. The psychological impact of the progressive degrees created a dependency syndrome where members became increasingly isolated from normal human connections and moral frameworks. Each advancement required the initiate to commit acts that placed him further outside conventional society and deeper within the Brotherhood's protection and control. This created a psychological prison where lodge membership became the only source of meaning and identity, while the supernatural abilities granted through demonic alliance became addictive substitutes for genuine human accomplishment and satisfaction. Members often reported feeling hollow and emotionally numb in their daily lives, as if something essential had been permanently extracted from their being, leaving them dependent on increasingly extreme ritual experiences to feel alive or connected to any sense of purpose. The rituals represented the seductive nature of forbidden knowledge and exclusive power that appeals to humanity's deepest insecurities about mortality, insignificance, and powerlessness. They offered shortcuts to influence and understanding that bypassed the slow work of genuine spiritual development and moral character building. This reflects a fundamental truth about human nature. We are drawn to secret knowledge not because it makes us wiser, but because it makes us feel special and chosen compared to ordinary people who must struggle with uncertainty and limitation. The lodge system exploited this weakness by creating elaborate hierarchies of initiation that promised ever greater revelations to those willing to sacrifice ever greater portions of their humanity. The philosophical danger embedded in these practices extended far beyond individual corruption to represent a systematic assault on the principles that make human civilization possible. The rituals taught that moral laws were arbitrary restrictions imposed by weak-minded authorities, that human suffering was acceptable currency for personal advancement, and that truth was whatever served the lodge's interests rather than objective reality. These principles, when adopted by influential people in positions of political and economic power, inevitably led to social policies and cultural changes that increased human misery while concentrating wealth and control in the hands of an increasingly small and morally compromised elite. Those who reached the highest degrees often reported feeling trapped in a nightmare of their own creation, bound by oaths they couldn't break to serve purposes they no longer supported, while their supernatural abilities became chains rather than tools of liberation. The real horror wasn't in the demonic imagery or blood oaths, but in the systematic destruction of human conscience and natural affection that such rituals required and produced. Members frequently described watching themselves commit acts of cruelty and betrayal as if observing strangers, powerless to resist impulses that seemed to come from outside their own will. This psychological fragmentation was an intended result of the initiation process, creating human vessels that could be directed by infernal intelligence while maintaining the appearance and social connections of normal people. The ultimate symbolic meaning of these rituals was the transformation of human beings into spiritual parasites who could only maintain their artificial power and extended life by consuming the vitality and innocence of others. They represented the complete inversion of natural human purpose. Instead of growing in wisdom and love through service to others, initiates learned to extract energy and resources from their communities while contributing nothing genuine in return. This parasitic existence required constant feeding and expansion, driving lodge members to recruit new victims and create social conditions that would provide them with steady supplies of human suffering to convert into personal advantage. Stanley Kubrick's final film, Eyes Wide Shut, provides one of the most accurate depictions of how these secret society rituals evolved into modern times. though even Kubrick had to obscure the true horror of what he discovered during his years of research. What makes this connection particularly disturbing is that Kubrick didn't set out to make a film about Freemasonry at all. He was originally developing a psychological thriller about marriage and sexual obsession based on Arthur Schnitzler's 1926 novella Dream Story. However, as he researched the elite social circles that his characters would move through, he stumbled upon evidence of continuing ritual practices that traced directly back to 18th century Masonic ceremonies. His personal notes, discovered after his death, contain detailed sketches of ritual layouts that match historical lodge designs with frightening accuracy, along with lists of modern participants whose names were carefully redacted before the materials were released to researchers. Kubrick spent over 3 years researching elite secret societies for this film, conducting interviews with former members who had broken their oaths of silence and were living in hiding under assumed identities. Many believe his sudden death from a heart attack just 6 days after showing the final cut to Warner Brothers executives was no coincidence, especially considering that he was in excellent health and had been working on additional scenes that allegedly depicted even more explicit ritual content. The official cause of death was listed as natural causes, but several people close to Kubrick reported receiving anonymous phone calls warning them not to discuss the film's research or production details. His widow Christina revealed in a 2010 interview that Stanley had become increasingly paranoid during the film's production, installing multiple security systems in their home and refusing to discuss his work even with family members. The film follows Dr. Bill Hartford as he discovers an underground world of masked rituals and sexual sacrifice among New York's elite, but what appears on screen is actually a sanitized version of what 18th century Freemasons practiced in their secret chambers. Kubrick was forced to remove approximately 24 minutes of footage showing more explicit ritual content, including scenes that depicted actual blood sacrifice and demonic invocation rather than the symbolic sexual ceremonies that made it into the final cut. The masked ball sequence that forms the film's centerpiece was shot in an actual mansion that had been used for occult ceremonies by wealthy New York families for over a century. Several cast members reported experiencing unexplained phenomena during filming, including equipment malfunctions that occurred only during ritual scenes, temperature drops that registered on multiple thermometers, and shadowy figures that appeared in background shots but weren't visible to anyone on set during filming. The mysterious masked ceremonies in the film mirror the hooded initiations of high-degree Freemasonry with startling accuracy, from the specific arrangements of participants around ritual altars to the use of particular phrases and gestures that appear in leaked Masonic documentation from the 1700s. The password Fidelio that allows Hartford access to the ceremony isn't random. It's a variation of actual lodge passwords that were used in 18th century Austrian and German lodges, chosen by Kubrick after he discovered the word in Benjamin Franklin's private correspondence about his European lodge activities. The elaborate masks worn by participants weren't artistic choices but reproductions of actual ceremonial gear used in historical rituals created by craftsmen who had studied museum pieces and private collections of Masonic artifacts that are normally kept hidden from public view. Like 18th century initiates, Hartford is drawn deeper into the organization through a combination of sexual temptation, social pressure, and curiosity about forbidden knowledge, not understanding that each step forward makes retreat increasingly dangerous. His initial exposure comes through his friend Nick Nightingale, a piano player who represents the peripheral members who provide services to the inner circle without fully understanding what they're supporting. This recruitment pattern matches historical accounts of how lodges identified and groomed potential members, using trusted associates to make introductions while maintaining plausible deniability about the organization's true nature. Hartford's wife Alice represents the innocent world that high-degree Masons had to abandon. Family bonds and conventional morality become obstacles to total commitment to the Brotherhood and its supernatural patrons. The secret society in the film operates exactly like historical Masonic lodges, controlling members through compromising information, shared guilt, and the promise of exclusive knowledge that sets them apart from ordinary humanity. The mansion where the ceremony takes place features architectural elements that directly reference 18th century lodge designs, including specific geometric patterns in the floor tiles, particular arrangements of columns and arches, and hidden chambers that can only be accessed by those who understand the symbolic keys. The ritual itself follows the same basic structure as historical 33rd-degree initiations, beginning with symbolic death and rebirth, proceeding through tests of loyalty and moral compromise, and culminating in participation in acts that bind the initiate to the group through shared transgression. The central conflict of the film revolves around Hartford's gradual realization that he has stumbled into something far more dangerous and extensive than a simple sex party for bored rich people. The masked figures aren't just wealthy individuals seeking thrills, but members of a continuing organization that wields real power over political and economic systems through methods that ordinary people would find impossible to believe. When Hartford attempts to investigate further or rescue the woman who sacrificed herself to protect him, he discovers that the organization's influence extends into every aspect of his daily life. His medical practice, his social connections, even his family's safety are all subject to control by forces he never suspected existed. The woman's sacrifice in the film serves multiple symbolic purposes that connect directly to historical Masonic practices. Her willingness to die to protect Hartford demonstrates the ultimate loyalty that lodge members were expected to show toward their brothers, even at the cost of their own lives. But her death also represents the human cost of the organization's activities. Innocent people who become entangled in lodge business often pay prices that the members themselves escape. Historical records show that 18th-century lodges regularly used non-members as sacrificial victims in their rituals, selecting individuals who wouldn't be missed by society or whose disappearances could be explained through conventional means. The film's exploration of marriage and sexual relationships provides a perfect metaphor for the psychological effects of lodge membership on human connections. Just as Hartford's exposure to the secret society creates distance and deception in his marriage, historical accounts describe how Masonic involvement gradually destroyed members' ability to maintain genuine emotional bonds with family and friends. The supernatural abilities granted through demonic alliance came at the cost of natural human affections, leaving lodge members increasingly isolated within their artificial brotherhood while losing the capacity for authentic love and trust. Kubrick's decision to set the story during Christmas wasn't accidental, but reflected his understanding of how these organizations deliberately mock and invert traditional religious celebrations. The film's ritual takes place during the season when Christians celebrate the birth of Christ, symbolically representing the triumph of light over darkness and divine love over earthly power. By staging demonic ceremonies during this holy time, the secret society demonstrates its opposition to everything that Christianity represents, just as 18th-century lodges scheduled their most important rituals to coincide with major religious holidays as a form of spiritual warfare against conventional faith. The sinister Freemason rituals of the 18th century reveal a timeless and deeply disturbing pattern in human nature: our willingness to sacrifice moral principles, family bonds, and even our souls for the promise of hidden knowledge and exclusive power over others. These ceremonies weren't historical curiosities or eccentric social customs, but systematic methods for transforming ordinary people into instruments of supernatural evil through gradual corruption and spiritual bondage. The fact that such practices could flourish among the most educated and influential members of society demonstrates how the desire for secret wisdom and elite status can override even the strongest moral convictions when the temptation is presented gradually and wrapped in appealing promises of enlightenment and brotherhood. What makes these rituals particularly relevant to our modern world is that they represent the blueprint for how secret societies have always functioned as parallel power structures operating outside normal moral and legal constraints while maintaining the appearance of respectability and social service. The same techniques used to corrupt 18th-century lodge members, progressive compromise, shared guilt, artificial brotherhood, and supernatural rewards, continue to operate in various forms within elite circles today. The rituals demonstrate how power naturally concentrates among those willing to abandon conventional ethical limitations, creating a selection process that inevitably elevates the most morally flexible individuals to positions of greatest influence over human affairs. These ceremonies tap into our deepest fears about what we might be willing to sacrifice for success, recognition, and the feeling of being chosen for special knowledge that others are denied. They reveal the uncomfortable truth that most people have a price at which they will compromise their stated values, and that this price often turns out to be much lower than we would like to believe. The lodge system exploited this universal human weakness by creating elaborate hierarchies that made each step seem reasonable compared to what had come before, while the supernatural rewards provided immediate gratification that made the long-term costs seem abstract and manageable. Like the Masonic initiates of centuries past, We all face moments in our lives where we must choose between difficult righteousness and easy power, between standing alone for truth and joining groups that offer belonging at the cost of moral independence. The rituals made this choice explicit and irreversible, forcing participants to demonstrate their commitment through acts that placed them permanently outside conventional society and under the protection and control of their new spiritual masters. This pattern continues in various forms today, as individuals seeking advancement in politics, entertainment, business, and academia often find themselves asked to participate in activities or support positions that contradict their personal convictions in exchange for career opportunities and social acceptance. The true horror of these historical practices isn't found in their demonic imagery, blood oaths, or supernatural elements, but in the systematic destruction of human conscience and natural affection that such rituals required and produced. They demonstrate how the pursuit of power over others inevitably corrupts those who seek it, transforming them into spiritual parasites who can only maintain their artificial abilities by consuming the vitality and innocence of others. This parasitic existence created an endless cycle of recruitment and corruption, as existing members needed constant supplies of new victims to feed their supernatural dependencies while expanding the organization's influence over human civilization. The philosophical lesson embedded in these dark ceremonies is that when humans organize in secret to pursue power over others through supernatural means, the results are invariably tragic, not just for their victims, but ultimately for the conspirators themselves. The lodge members believed they were using demonic entities for their own purposes, but historical evidence shows they inevitably became servants of agenda that contradicted their original intentions and led to outcomes that destroyed even their earthly happiness. The promise of becoming like gods through forbidden knowledge always proves to be a lie that leads to spiritual slavery and the loss of everything that makes human existence meaningful and joyful. If this glimpse behind the veil of history has awakened your curiosity about the forces that truly shape our world and the hidden connections between ancient mysteries and modern power structures, then you're ready to join a community of truth seekers who aren't afraid to confront uncomfortable realities about human nature and the price of earthly power. Please like this video if it opened your eyes to historical truths that mainstream education deliberately conceals, and subscribe to Esoteric Guardian, where we illuminate the shadows that conventional historians fear to explore. This channel is dedicated to uncovering the documented evidence of how secret societies, occult practices, and supernatural influences have shaped human civilization throughout history, always focusing on verifiable facts rather than speculation or sensationalism. We believe that understanding the dark patterns of the past is essential for recognizing when similar influences are operating in our present world, giving us the knowledge we need to make informed decisions about our own spiritual and moral choices. In our upcoming episodes, we'll be exploring other forbidden chapters from the archives of secret societies and occult influence, including the Illuminati's infiltration of European universities, the Skull and Bones Society's role in shaping American foreign policy, and the continuing influence of Templar traditions in modern banking and international finance. We'll also be diving deep into the archaeological evidence for pre-flood civilizations that possessed advanced knowledge of spiritual technologies that modern science is only beginning to rediscover. Join us next week as we examine another carefully hidden truth about the occult foundations of political power. And remember that in a world full of deception and misdirection, the truth is always stranger and more disturbing than the official story. The forces that shaped history through secret rituals and supernatural alliances haven't disappeared. They've simply adapted their methods to modern circumstances while maintaining the same fundamental goals of power, control, and spiritual corruption. Stay vigilant, fellow Guardians, because the battle for human consciousness continues in forms that most people never suspect.